When I stepped out of the shower and noticed the yellow sticky note on my bathroom mirror, I was more confused than afraid because it was stuck right in the middle of the glass and was written in messy, uneven handwriting. I frowned and wondered why I hadn't put it there because I've never been the type to get scared easily. I live alone in a small apartment and I like it that way. No roommates to deal with, no unexpected noises in the middle of the night, just me and my routine. I was certain that I didn't even own sticky notes. How did it get there? My front door was still bolted, the bathroom door was shut, and there were no windows open. Despite my instincts telling me not to, I turned around after staring at the message and saw nothing but the empty bathroom with the water still flowing behind me. I stood still in the bathroom, the door still locked, but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy sense that someone was watching. The message hadn't been there before in my shower, and my flat was empty, so how in the world did it get there? My breath was coming in short, rapid spurts. After swallowing hard and forcing myself to think rationally, I slowly reached out and peeled it off the mirror, turning it over in my fingers to reveal a blank back. Perhaps I had forgotten, or perhaps I had written it as a joke to myself and didn't remember, but the handwriting wasn't mine, and I still didn't have any sticky notes. I had no idea where it had come from, but a shiver went down my spine. I checked my apartment, every room, every closet, even under the bed, nothing, no signs of forced entry. My door was still locked, the windows were latched shut. I was alone, so why didn't it feel like it? I tried to push it out of my mind. I went about my evening as usual, but the unease never left. Every time I passed by a mirror, I caught myself glancing at my reflection, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. By the time I went to bed, I had almost convinced myself it was just some bizarre lapse in memory, a prank I had somehow played on myself, but deep down I didn't believe that, and when I woke up the next morning I knew I had been right because there was another note stuck to my bedroom mirror, "Don't let it," and I jerked upright in bed, my stomach twisting. I grabbed the note, my fingers trembling. The handwriting was the same, messy, uneven, like someone had scrawled it in a hurry. My mouth went dry. Had someone been in my room while I was sleeping? No, impossible. The door had been locked, and yet the note was here. I forced myself to check the apartment again that day. I was unable to go to work, so I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the two sticky notes in front of me. The first note told me not to turn around, and the second warned me not to let it in. So whatever this was, it wasn't over. A terrible thought began to creep into my head. What if there was another note? I stood suddenly, my chair scraping the floor, my heart pounding, and I walked toward the bathroom. I hesitated at the doorway, my pulse in my throat. The mirror was clear, and I let out a shaky breath. Perhaps it was done, or perhaps this was a wait. I carefully turned to face the hallway mirror, fear building in my belly. I had not yet examined it, and as I pushed myself to approach it, my legs felt like lead. My face was pale, my eyes were wide with fatigue, and my reflections were plastered to the glass as they looked back at me. When I heard a third note, my hands shook as I peeled it away, and my eyes searched the words, "It's already inside." I dropped the note, and as I took a shaky step back, my breath came in uneven gasps inside. The warning hadn't been about letting it in, it was already here. I spun around, looking around my apartment, and the living room was empty, the hallway was silent, but something wasn't right. The air felt different, thick, and suffocating, as if I wasn't alone. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but it wouldn't go through. I tried again, but nothing came through. This wasn't a joke. There was something inside of me that was settling in my stomach. I made myself get up and move. I made sure that every door and window was still locked, and then I focused on the mirrors in my bedroom, bathroom, and hallway. All of them reflected the same thing, just me, but I knew something was wrong because they were watching me. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, trying to keep my breathing steady, whispering, "Who's doing this?" I reached out and pressed my fingers against the glass. It was cold and normal, but then my reflection blinked, and I stumbled back, my pulse skyrocketing. The one inside the mirror tilted its head slightly, studying me, and then slowly, deliberately, it smiled a slow, unnatural grin that didn't belong to me. I felt sick. My chest tightened as I turned away, refusing to look any longer, but as I backed toward the door I noticed something even worse. The sticky notes, they weren't on the mirrors anymore, they were on the walls, dozens of them stuck everywhere. I turned slowly, scanning the room in horror. Each note had the same 4 words: "Don't let it out." My blood ran cold. This wasn't about something getting in, it was about keeping something from getting out. I turned back to the mirror, but my reflection was gone. Just empty glass. Then a whisper right behind me, "You should have listened." The lights flickered, the air rippled, and then the mirror shattered. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up hours later, sprawled on my bedroom floor. The glass was gone, the sticky notes were gone, the mirror still there, but the surface was wrong, dark, like it wasn't reflecting light anymore, like it wasn't reflecting anything at all. I packed my things that night and left the apartment. I didn't care where I went, I just needed to go. I never went back. I don't know what I let out that night, but sometimes when I pass a mirror, any mirror, I catch a glimpse of something that isn't me, and I know deep down it's still watching, waiting, and smiling. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a decent complex, not fancy but safe enough. I moved in about a year ago, and up until recently I never had a reason to worry. The building has security cameras at every entrance, and you need a key fob to access the elevators. It's the kind of place where you nod at your neighbors in the hallway but don't really know them. I've always been cautious living alone. You have to be. I double-check my locks before bed, keep a hat near my nightstand, and I even installed a security camera inside my apartment, not because I thought I'd need it, but because it gave me peace of mind. When I traveled for months, nothing ever happened. Then last Wednesday, I got a notification from my security app while I was at work. Motion detected living room camera. At first I thought it was a glitch. I checked the live feed expecting to see my cat knocking something over, but the apartment was empty, nothing out of place. The motion alert had been triggered, but there was no movement anymore. Weird, but I brushed it off. Maybe a shadow, or maybe the system was just being overly sensitive. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I checked the recorded footage. The camera caught something. Someone had entered my apartment, a figure just inside the front door, not clear enough to make out their face, but tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes. They stepped into the living room, moved just out of frame, and never came back. I sat motionless on my bed, clutching my phone as I watched the video repeatedly, hoping that I had missed some clue that they had left. However, the camera only captured the entrance and a portion of the living room, and once the person stepped out of frame, there was no sign of them leaving, no movement near the front door, and I felt sick. I swallowed hard and looked around my apartment. The closet doors were closed, and the bathroom door was slightly open, just as I had left it. The pantry door in the kitchen was closed. Everything appeared the same, but I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Slowly, I got to my feet. My whole body felt tense, like I was walking through a minefield. The apartment was empty and perfectly normal, but I didn't feel normal. I made myself go through every room, every hiding place, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, inside the closet, even the small area behind the couch, where I pressed my hand to make sure no one was crouching. My mind raced as I returned to my phone and stared at the surveillance video, trying to figure out whether it was a malfunction or a break-in where they somehow escaped undetected. I wanted more explanations. I retrieved security footage from the hallway camera outside my apartment, which was installed by the building. If someone had entered, they would have needed to enter through the front door. I rewound the footage to coincide with the motion alert that had been sent earlier that day, and I waited until 12:36 p.m. I saw a man walk down the hall wearing dark clothing, a hoodie, and his hands in his pockets. He stopped at my door and stood there for a few long seconds, his head tilted slightly as though he was listening. My stomach turned, and I leaned closer to my phone screen. Then, in one fluid motion, he reached into his pocket, took out a small object, and unlocked my door. My breath caught when I saw that he had a key. The video showed him entering and shutting the door after himself. 20 minutes went by, and an hour went by, and nobody came out. I felt lightheaded, and my front door had been locked when I got home. If he had let himself in, who had locked it? I grabbed my car keys and my bag, and my only thought was to leave, regardless of the fact that I had already inspected every inch of my apartment. I practically ran down the stairs rather than waiting for the elevator. My hands were shaking as I got into my car and locked the doors. My phone buzzed with a notice from my security app's motion-detecting living room camera as soon as I stepped inside. As I gazed at the television, my breath came in sudden, irregular gasps. I was about to turn it off when I noticed that the closet door was slightly open. I hadn't left it that way, and I could hardly breathe as I watched the screen. The door had been closed when I left, but now there was the smallest gap, a shadow barely visible inside. The last motion alert had been hours ago when the man first entered. I opened the app with shaking fingers, pulling up the live feed for a moment. The video was nothing but static, and my heart had slammed against my ribs. My car was still parked outside my apartment building, and my phone screen was glowing in the dim dashboard light. The security feed revealed the closet door cracked open just a little, creating a sliver of darkness between the wooden panels. Someone was still in my apartment, and I had nearly spent the night with them. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel. I had to phone the police with trembling hands since I couldn't see anything inside, but I didn't need to because someone had been in my flat the whole time. I resisted the temptation to scream. "What emergency do you have? I'm outside in my car right now, okay? Officers are on their way. Can you describe the suspect? Someone broke into my apartment earlier today, and I left because I was scared. However, after checking my security camera, I swallowed hard and shook my voice. I think they're still inside. Are you safe? They seemed to be wearing a hoodie when they entered my flat, but I have surveillance tape showing them doing so with a key." "Yes," I murmured, "and they opened my door as if they were supposed to, and they never left." I attempted to calm my breathing. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but I could hear the urgency behind her words. "Officers will be there in less than 5 minutes. Stay on the line with me." I kept staring at the live feed, unable to look away. The closet door remained still, no movement, no shadow shifting, but I knew they were in there. They had been hiding, waiting. I thought about the moments I had spent inside my apartment after work, checking the rooms, locking my door, sitting on my couch, while someone was already inside. My stomach turned. If I hadn't checked the footage, would they have waited until I was asleep? A blur of red and blue lights flashed in my mirror. My body sagged with relief as I saw 2 police cars pull up. The dispatcher's voice came through. "Officers are on scene. They're heading inside now." I could see them through the camera feed. 2 officers stepping cautiously through my front door, guns drawn. One moved toward the bedroom, the other approached the closet. For a moment nothing happened. Then the closet door burst open. A figure lunged out. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but I saw the struggle. I let out a trembling breath as one of the officers moved into frame and took my phone from the table, looking into the camera. "It's safe now," the dispatcher said in my ear. "The suspect is in custody." The officer grabbed the intruder, forcing them to the ground and pinning them down as they fought. Muffled shouts, the sound of furniture crashing, and then silence. My heart continued to pound against my ribs as I scarcely noticed that I was nodding. One of the cops came up to my vehicle a few minutes later. I rolled down the window, my fingers still shaking, and he said, "Are you okay?" I gulped, and he asked, "Who is it?" He paused before responding. "His name is Daniel Holloway." "Do you know him?" I shook my head. The name didn't signify anything to me. The cop groaned and shifted, saying, "He knows you're feeling sick." Twisted in my gut. "What do you mean?" He pulled something from his pocket, a small battered notebook. "We found this in his jacket," he said, flipping it open. "It's full of notes about your routine, where you go, what time you come home, even little things, what you order for lunch, what shows you watch." My mouth went dry. "We also found this," he continued, holding up a small key, my apartment key, except I still had mine. I stared at it, feeling lightheaded. How did he get that? The officer's expression hardened. "We don't know yet, but we're going to find out." I pressed a hand to my mouth. I wanted to throw up. Daniel Holloway, a stranger, someone I had never met, but who had been watching me, living inside my apartment, waiting. I don't remember much after that. The officers took my statement, collected the security footage, and reassured me that Daniel wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. But it didn't matter. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. The thought of going back to that apartment, knowing he had been there, knowing he had a key, made my skin crawl. I moved out at the end of the week, and even now, I double lock my doors, check my closets before bed, and have cameras in every room. But no matter how careful I am, I can't get rid of the sense that someone is still watching. The date was September 6th. I will never forget, not because anything noteworthy occurred, but rather because I discovered the first note on that day. I dug inside my backpack to get my phone when I was at work, just completing my lunch at my desk. When my fingers touched a small folded piece of paper, I initially assumed it was just a receipt or a sticky note I had forgotten about, but when I unfolded it, I felt sick to my stomach. I looked around the office and scowled, wondering if someone had placed this in my bag, which had been sitting next to me all day. I looked at the back of the note, hoping for some sort of explanation, but it was blank, so I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, telling myself it might have been a prank. But the following morning, I saw another one. "Why did you throw it away?" Whoever was leaving these notes was watching me. I emptied my suitcase in an attempt to find anything else, but the more I thought about it, the worse it became. Before leaving for a meeting, I put a small piece of tape over the zipper. If someone opened it, I'd know. An hour later, I returned to my desk and checked that the tape was gone, and inside my bag, a third note. Stopped looking. My hands trembled as I shoved the note deep into my pocket. I wondered who could have done this, a coworker or someone on the bus. The problem was that my bag never left my sight, meaning whoever was doing this was getting close enough to touch it without my knowledge. This realization made it impossible for me to concentrate on my work. The person who targeted me and got close enough to touch my bag didn't want me to find them, so this wasn't a prank. I felt like my skin was too tight the rest of the day, and every sound in the office felt sharper, every cough, every chair scraping the floor, every voice too near my desk. My mind was racing about how I had been careful and kept my bag zipped close to me at all times. The only time I left it unattended was during that meeting, but it was in my locked office, and when I returned, the note was inside, indicating that whoever was doing this had access to my office. Whoever was doing this was near me, possibly even watching me right now. I forced myself to act normally, with no sudden movements and no panicked glances over my shoulder if they wanted me scared. I left work early because I couldn't stand to sit at my desk any longer. When I got home, I threw my bag on my bed and began going through every pocket, zipper, and lining. Then, I discovered something at the bottom of my bag, hidden under my wallet, which I hadn't noticed before. A fourth note, which I unfolded with shaking hands, asked, "Why are you ignoring me?" I texted Matt, "I need to ask you something," and he replied, "Do you remember anyone touching my bag today, Matt? How? What do you mean me just telling me at work? Did anyone get close to it?" A few minutes went by before he replied, "Matt," but I didn't understand why I hesitated. I didn't want to explain over text, so I'll tell you in person, Matt. Yes, you were all right with me. I don't remember that night, but I checked my apartment door twice before turning in for the night. I also made sure I could hear if someone tried to touch my bag by keeping it zipped up and placed it on the nightstand next to me. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, my heart racing, waiting for something, and when I finally felt exhausted, I checked my bag first thing in the morning. Before I even opened it, I knew what I would see. I took out another letter, dread rising in my gut, and I felt a sudden cold. "Don't tell him." They were advising me not to threaten me because they were aware of Matt and knew I was going to speak with him. My hands shook as I shoved the note deep into my pocket. This wasn't just someone messing with me anymore. This was something else, something worse, and whoever they were, they weren't done yet. I sat frozen on my bed, gripping the latest note so tightly the paper crumpled in my hand. "Don't tell him." They knew whoever was doing this, whoever had been slipping notes into my bag. They knew I had talked to Matt. And that meant one thing: they were watching me. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I sat in my apartment, blinds shut, bag zipped tight, thinking I had to be careful now. If they knew about Matt, they could no more. Had they been watching for days, weeks longer? I grabbed my phone and checked my call history, my messages, even my search history, looking for any sign that my phone had been compromised. Nothing, but that didn't mean I was safe. I needed to be sure. That afternoon, I stuffed my bag with random junk, old receipts, loose change, a pack of gum, anything except what I usually carried then. Before leaving the apartment, I slipped a tiny tracking tag into one of the pockets. If they took my bag or went through it again, I'd know, and if I could figure out who they were, maybe I could finally end this. I met Matt at a diner across town, somewhere I'd never been before. I waited until we were seated in a booth far from the entrance before I finally spoke. "I think someone's been messing with me," I said. Matt frowned. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, then I told him everything, the notes, the way they kept appearing, how whoever was doing this knew my schedule, knew about him. When I was finished, Matt leaned back in his seat, rubbing his jaw. "Okay," he said slowly, "that's seriously messed up, but do you have any idea who it could be?" I shook my head, paused, and said, "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Matt's eyes narrowed. "You're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you?" I'm not sure why, but I forced a grin in my pocket. That night, I kept my hand on my phone, waiting for the tracker to go off. I checked the app every few minutes, and my luggage remained unattended in my apartment. I began to worry that maybe this would be the last night they returned, or that whomever it was had finally stopped at precisely 3:12 a.m. My breath caught as the tracker moved, and I sat up in bed and stared at the computer. The dot had left my apartment and was now slowly making its way down my street and toward me. I had little time to react when I heard a gentle, purposeful knock on my front door. My pulse spiked. I slid out of bed, moving carefully toward the people. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I pressed my eye to the glass and froze because standing outside my door in the dim hallway light was Matt. He stood completely still, not knocking again, not calling my name, just standing waiting. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. My phone buzzed. The new message from Matt let me in. I couldn't breathe. The real Matt. The one I had met earlier that day was asleep at home. He had no reason to be here, which meant whoever was standing outside my door, it wasn't him. I didn't answer the door. I didn't answer the texts. I called the cops instead. By the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. No sign of Matt or whoever had been pretending to be him. The only thing they found, a note slipped under my door. It was short, just 2 words: next time. I moved out 2 days later. I changed my number, blocked every contact I didn't recognize. I never told Matt the full story, and I never leave my bag unattended anymore, because whoever it was, whatever they wanted, I don't think they were done, and one day I'm afraid they'll try again. I've worked at a mid-size marketing company for a few years now, long enough to know everyone by name and settle into the comfortable rhythm of daily routines. It's a simple office with cubicles, coffee makers, and the occasional awkward birthday celebration in the break room. To be honest, I like that it's not the kind of location where amazing things happen. The majority of the days were predictable. Before going to my workstation, I would come in, have my customary coffee, and have a little conversation with Julia at the front desk. Although I didn't have a close relationship with anyone at work, I got along well enough with my coworkers. My job was simple, and the office atmosphere was professional but friendly. I didn't mind that there weren't many surprises, though occasionally someone would bring flowers. There was usually a short moment of excitement when someone's birthday, anniversary, or new relationship came around, and a few coworkers would come around to read the message and speculate about who gave it. Julia, the workplace gossip, had a theory all the time. Accounting's Mia is in a relationship. I never gave it much attention since I assumed she would say something dramatic or something like, "Oh, that is breakup apology" written all over it. It was a harmless little diversion from the routine of office life. It was a lovely arrangement of roses nestled in a glass vase with fresh, delicate petals that gave off a faint floral scent that clashed with the usual mix of stale coffee and printer ink. Julia teased from her desk near the entrance, suggesting that someone had a secret admirer. I had never received flowers on my birthday, Valentine's Day, or after a bad day, so when I walked into the office that Monday morning and saw a bouquet sitting on my desk, I actually stopped in my tracks. Several coworkers gave me odd looks, but I just chuckled and shook my head, thinking it must have been an error. I responded, taking a step closer, but as I took out the little white card that was hidden between the flowers, my stomach knotted. "You look stunning today, as you usually do." The words were straightforward, yet something about them made my skin tingle. For a moment, I just stood there looking at the letters. It couldn't be that it was a coincidence or that someone else had similar handwriting, but the more I looked, the more certain I became that the loops of the Y's were correct. I turned the card over and read it again. It wasn't printed like most delivery notes, but it was handwritten, and the handwriting looked exactly like mine. I took a deep breath, put the card back in the bouquet, and forced myself to focus on my emails. Perhaps it was a prank that seemed like the most logical explanation, but it wasn't funny. By lunchtime, I had almost persuaded myself to brush it off because the flowers were pretty and the person who sent them hadn't written anything threatening. Perhaps it was a harmless admirer who simply didn't know how to confess properly. Weird, but not necessarily dangerous. I sat down at my desk and tried to ignore the way my heart was pounding. I hadn't written this, I knew for sure, so who had? I promised myself that I would stop thinking about it, but the following morning, another bouquet was waiting for me. This time, the card said, "I love seeing you smile," and the handwriting was still mine. I stood frozen at my desk, staring at the second bouquet while my stomach turned to knots. The first one had been unsettling, but I had tried to dismiss it as a strange prank or a secret admirer who was unaware of how creepy they were being. But 2 days in a row wasn't a coincidence, rather, it was intentional. The worst part was the card. I felt like I was suffocating for a moment, and I thought about throwing the flowers away right away. But I hesitated because if this was a prank, throwing them out wouldn't stop whoever was doing it. In fact, it might encourage them to take things further. Instead, I forced myself to sit down and placed the card face down on my desk as I tried to focus on my work, but my hands were shaking. Another one. The handwriting was still mine, and I picked up the note and ran my fingers over the ink, half expecting it to smudge under my touch, but it didn't. My thoughts were interrupted by Julia's words as she leaned on the edge of my cubicle and crossed her arms in a sly grin. "Damn, your secret admirer is persistent," I remarked, producing a feeble smile. I guess she reached out and flicked the card over with one finger, and as she read the message, her smirk faded. "Okay, that's kind of intense." I laughed nervously, and she studied my face, her brow furrowing. I shook my head, and Julia picked up the flowers, examining them as if she could extract answers from the petals. There was no delivery slip, no sender information. I verified once again. Just to be certain, the person who sent them had taken extra care to ensure that they couldn't be tracked down. I wanted the answer yes, but the fact was that I hadn't dated anybody in months, and even if I had, what sort of person would go to this extent? The notion made my skin crawl. Perhaps I should contact the flower shop. Julia pursed her lips. "You sure it's not like an ex or someone you went on a date with?" she said. I grabbed my phone and asked if they could tell me who had placed the order. Julia agreed, "Good idea," and I waited until she had left before calling the number on the vase's back. A happy voice answered, "Sunbeam Floral." "How may I assist you?" I asked, maintaining a calm tone. "Do you have the order number?" I hesitated because there wasn't one included. There was a pause on the other end. "Oh well, if you could explain the arrangement, I can check our system and rattle off the details." I received 2 flower deliveries at my office, but there was no information. My stomach fell as the florist eventually said, "I'm so sorry, but I don't have any record of those orders in our system." We didn't deliver them, and I felt a chill go down my spine. "Are you sure you're sure? I can see every order we fulfilled this week and nothing matches what you described." I swallowed hard. "Okay, thanks for your help." I hung up and stared at the flowers, my mind racing. If the florist hadn't delivered them, then who did? Had someone come here and left them at my desk themselves? The office had security. You needed a key card to get in, which meant whoever was sending these flowers wasn't just some distant admirer. They had access to my office. They were already inside. I couldn't focus for the Rest of the day my eyes kept drifting back to the flowers, to the card with my own handwriting staring back at me. My thoughts raced in circles trying to figure out who could have done this. If the flowers weren't from the florist, that meant someone had brought them inside themselves, someone who worked here or someone who had access. That thought made me feel sick. I spent the next few hours replaying the past few weeks in my mind, trying to remember if I had noticed anything strange. Had I ever caught someone watching me? Had I seen anyone near my desk when they shouldn't have been? Nothing stood out. By the time my shift ended, I had made up my mind I needed to tell someone. This wasn't just a harmless admirer, this was someone watching me, someone messing with me, and I needed to find out who. I went straight to building security. The main desk was on the first floor near the elevators. A middle-aged guard named Dave was usually there drinking coffee and half watching the cameras. When I said, "Hey, I need something," he looked up. I hesitated for a second, thinking that maybe I was overreacting, or maybe this was all a prank. But then I remembered the notes and how well they matched my handwriting. I said, "I think someone's been getting into my office," and Dave straightened his coffee and put it down. "What makes you say that?" I quickly explained the flowers and the notes, explaining that the florist had no record of the deliveries. His face darkened as I spoke. "That's weird," he muttered. "You sure no one's just messing with you? If they're taking it way too far." He nodded, then turned to his computer. As he displayed the security footage from that morning, I leaned over the desk. Although the cameras weren't in the actual office building, they did cover the front entrance, the elevators, and the corridors that went to the various departments. "All right," Dave rewinded the movie and said, "What time do you usually get in?" He wiped through the film and slowed it down at 8:30. At 8:37 a.m., I saw my coworker ERS sneaking in, some holding coffee, some conversing as they got off the elevator. I observed it. A guy strode purposefully through the side entrance right past security, wearing a baseball hat pulled low over his face, a simple sweatshirt, black trousers, and no employment badge. He didn't even seem like he worked here. He was going directly for my level. Dave scowled and didn't scan in. I questioned him in a tense voice, but I had no clue. "But he shouldn't be here," Dave whispered. We watched as the guy vanished down the corridor to my section and returned a little while later, but without the flowers. My heart was racing, so I whispered to Dave, rewinding the video and stopping at the best possible view of the man's face. It was only a fleeting glimpse before he turned away, but something about him seemed familiar, and then I noticed the slight hunch of his shoulders, the curve of his jaw, and the way he walked. "Can you print that?" Dave continued. "You need to take this to Harp, maybe even the cops," but I couldn't remember where I had seen him previously. I took a hesitant breath. I nodded and held onto the paper as it came out of the printer. My fingers shook a little, but I held on tight because this wasn't a joke. Someone had been observing me and studying me. I had no idea why they had copied my handwriting or why they believed that sending me flowers would attract my attention, but I knew that this wasn't going to end and I wasn't going to wait to find out what happened next. I've never had a paranoid streak. I don't sleep with a baseball bat under my bed. I don't check behind my shower curtain before entering, and I don't have security cameras in my apartment because, to be honest, I've never thought I needed them. But now I wish I had cameras watching everything because last night I discovered something I wasn't supposed to find, a hidden camera in my bedroom. When I picked it up with shaking hands, I saw the red light blink and it was still recording. I had been cleaning, nothing major, just a late-night attempt to organize my chaotic closet. Work had been stressful, so I figured that maybe cleaning my space would help me decompress. But tonight I noticed something strange. Next to my bed had a loose panel on the back. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, assuming it was just poorly assembled, cheap furniture that wasn't put together correctly. To my astonishment, when I pushed it with my fingertips along the edge, it moved, not just slightly, and burst open, revealing itself securely nestled within the concealed gap was a small black device that I initially thought was some sort of charger or adapter that I had forgotten about. But when I took it out and turned it over in my hands, my stomach twisted, and I saw that it was a camera. It was no larger than a matchbox, and it had a single glossy lens that stared back at me like an unblinking eye. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears as I turned it over, looking for a label or brand, but all I could see was a smooth black surface with one small detail, a small red light that was blinking. I almost dropped it. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the camera, my mind racing, trying to figure out how long it had been there, who had placed it, and what the hell had they been watching. The only person who should have had access to my flat was myself, so how in the world did this happen? I live alone, have no roommates, partner, or landlord who shows up unexpectedly. I had to examine my bedroom, closet, vents, smoke alarm, nightstand, and any other area that may conceal a camera since I got up so quickly that my eyesight became blurry. I went through my belongings like a crazy person, pushing furniture away from the walls and pulling out drawers. Nothing helped, though, because one camera was bad enough, and worse, I had no idea who had placed it there. I made myself sit down again, my mind racing, wondering what to do, call the police, perhaps, but what if they didn't take it seriously? What if they asked me how long it had been there? I had to admit that I didn't know I needed answers first. I looked down at the camera again, my hands still shaking, and turned it over again, seeing a small memory card in my stomach. I felt violated by the twisted videos of me sleeping, changing, and living in what should have been my private place. I wanted to crush it, toss it in the garbage, and burn it, but I had to first know what was on it, so I perched on the side of my bed and gripped the little black camera. My hands shook as I took the little memory card out of the slot. It was too small, and something about handling it made my skin crawl. I didn't want to know what was on that memory card, but I had to because I wanted to know who had been watching me. After taking a big breath and grabbing my laptop, I inserted the card into an adapter and hit play. At first, the film was only of my bedroom, with the camera pointed toward my bed to capture almost the whole space. The first few files were time-lapse. Videos of me sleeping, turning over, and sometimes moving in bed made my stomach flip. I thought someone was filming me, but then I saw something worse, a file with the date 3:12 a.m. There was no time-lapse. When I clicked on it, my heart was pounding in my ears. The video was darker than the others, and I could hardly see my own sleeping form. Then, from the doorway, a figure wearing a black outfit entered the frame, and my whole body tensed as they moved slowly and deliberately toward my bed. My stomach twisted into knots as I clamped a hand over my mouth. I watched in horror as the figure reached out and touched my hair. The screen flickered, and my vision swam, making it difficult for me to breathe. I had been sleeping, totally unaware that a stranger had been in my room, watching me, and touching me. My body felt numb, so I slammed the laptop shut so I could no longer watch. My legs wouldn't work, and I felt trapped because if they had been in my room earlier, who's to say they weren't here now? I forced myself to stand and my knees felt weak as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 while my fingers were shaking. The operator picked up 911. "What emergency do you have?" I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat. I turned to face my bedroom door, and then I heard a soft, deliberate creak coming from the closet. I had already searched my entire apartment, but in my panic, I had forgotten to check one place, so I swallowed hard and gripped my phone tightly, my knuckles aching. "Hello," the operator repeated. I took a slow, shaky step toward the closet door, and it was open just enough for someone to have been hiding there the entire time. I raised my other hand, fingers shaking, and reached for the handle, and I could hear my own heartbeat loudly pounding, deafening. I yanked the door open, but nothing was there, and I staggered back, my mind racing. Had I imagined the sound? Had I just missed them, or were they still here somewhere I hadn't looked yet? I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice barely a whisper. "I need help." I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a harsh pounding at my door. "Cops." I opened it quickly. Officer Martinez, the older officer, took my laptop and began going through the files with his partner, Officer Patel, who started checking my apartment. I stood there with my arms wrapped around me, watching as Patel scanned my windows, vents, closets, and other places I had already checked. When she reached my front door, she paused, her eyes narrowed, and she pointed to something just above the door frame, a tiny black dot, another camera. I barely let them inside before she blurted everything out. Martinez got up from my laptop. "We need to study this tape, but given what I've seen so far, you should leave this apartment right now." I didn't dispute. I packed my suitcase and left an hour later, and the days that followed were a fog. I stayed at a friend's place while the police investigated. They found 4 more cameras hidden throughout my apartment, one in the smoke detector, one inside a vent, another inside a power outlet. Whoever had been watching me had done this before, but the worst part, they never found him. The locks hadn't been tampered with. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever had been inside my apartment had a key, and even though the police checked every camera's recording, every file on that memory card, they never caught his face. He always stayed in the shadows watching, waiting, and just like that he was gone. I never went back to that apartment. I moved across the city, started fresh in a new place. This time I picked an upper floor unit in a building with secure entry. I installed my own locks, put up security cameras that I checked every morning. For a while I thought I was safe. Then last week I got a call from the detective assigned to my case. We traced where the cameras were transmitting. He said. My stomach tightened, and a pause, then his next words changed everything. The signal was coming from inside the building. I gripped the phone, my breath catching in my throat. Not from some distant location, not from another city, from inside the same apartment complex a few floors down. I felt like my skin was burning. The police were moving in on the suspect. They wouldn't tell me who he was yet, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over, because for months I had lived just a few floors above the person who had been watching me, and if I hadn't found that first hidden camera, I never would have. I spent the majority of my childhood keeping myself occupied because I grew up in a small town where not much happened. It was a safe neighborhood where people waved at each other but didn't really talk. My parents were there, but they were always busy. My dad worked long shifts, and my mom took on odd jobs whenever she could. When I was feeling adventurous, I played outside a lot and explored the woods behind our house. Looking back, I realized how much freedom I had. I could go anywhere, do anything, and no one was really watching at the time. I loved it. I could lose myself for hours climbing trees, gathering strange-looking rocks, and building forts out of fallen branches. I never considered how simple it would have been for someone to be watching me. Only lately did I begin to consider the possibility that someone was the first letter arrived in my mailbox a few weeks ago, wedged between store catalogs and bills. It was a small, cream-colored envelope with my name written in neat cursive across the front, no return address, and no postage stamp. At first, I thought it was some sort of promotional mail, one of those phony handwritten notes that turn out to be a local business advertisement or a real estate offer. But when I opened it, all it said was, "You're even more beautiful now than you were back." I read it twice, then a third time, trying to figure out what that meant, but it didn't feel like a typical secret admirer note. I put it aside and didn't give it much thought. Perhaps it was a mistake. Perhaps someone sent it to the wrong box. But a second letter arrived a few days later, and I still remember how much you loved climbing that old oak tree. Don't be afraid of my stomach. Twisted, there had been an oak tree in my backyard growing up, a massive one with thick branches perfect for climbing. It had been my favorite spot. I used to spend hours up there reading, daydreaming, hiding away from the world. But I hadn't lived in that house since I was 11, and no one, not even my closest friends, had ever mentioned that tree since I held the letter in my hand staring at the words. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, like someone had taken their time writing it. My first thought was that it had to be from someone I used to know, an old friend maybe, but why now? I tried to push it out of my mind. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking it. Then the third letter came. This time it wasn't in my mailbox. It was slipped under my apartment door. I still remember your favorite hiding spot, the one behind the shed. No one ever found you there, but I did. I dropped the letter the moment I read it. My hands were shaking because that hiding spot had been mine, and mine alone. It was a little space between the back of the shed and the wooden fence, just big enough for me to crawl into. I had used it all the time when I played hide and seek, convinced it was the best secret in the world, and as far as I knew, no one had ever found me there. No one. I scrambled to my feet and checked the lock on my door. It was still latched, just like I had left it, but someone had been here. Someone had gotten close enough to leave the letter. Without me hearing a thing, I rushed to the window, scanning the parking lot, the sidewalks, the street below. Everything looked normal. People were going about their day. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I reached for my phone. Who was I meant to contact? The police, even as my fingers were hanging over the call button. How could I ever explain to them that I was receiving notes on my early years that weren't illegal? I inhaled deeply and made an effort to think rationally. Perhaps I was exaggerating, or perhaps someone from my past had recognized my name, discovered my residence, and chosen to toy with me. However, that idea didn't cheer me up, because, whoever it was, they weren't merely sending letters, they were approaching, and I might not find a note the next time. Even with my doors shut and the chain fastened, I couldn't get rid of the impression that someone was waiting outside. Every small sound, like pipes groaning, a vehicle driving by on the street, or the wind rattling the window, made me gasp for air. I reminded myself that while I was being worried, paranoia doesn't leave a note on your door. The next morning, I made myself go about my daily activities as usual. I washed, dressed, and prepared coffee, but my hands were still trembling when I grabbed for my keys. I had to find answers at work, but I could hardly focus. My thoughts kept returning to the letters, which brought up memories I hadn't considered in years. I recognized the oak tree, the shed, and the sender. I took out my phone during my lunch break and called my mom. She answered all of my questions, but I hesitated for a moment. She hummed distractedly, and I could hear dishes clinking in the background. "What's up? Do you remember anyone from the old neighborhood? For example, did we ever have a neighbor who was around a lot and paid attention to me?" She laughed lightly. "I was simply wondering why there has been so much nostalgia recently," I said quickly while she sighed, thinking, "You used to play with a few kids. The Johnsons lived next door, but they moved when you were 10, and there was that one boy, what was his name? You two were always outside together." I felt a cold chill run through me. "What boy? Oh, you wouldn't remember, you were so young," she said. "But there was a kid a little older than you. He lived with his grandmother a few houses down. You followed him everywhere." I gripped my phone tighter. "Mom, what was his name?" She hesitated. "Oh, it's been so long, honey. I don't know. We didn't know them well, and I think they moved away before we did." A pit formed in my stomach. Someone from that neighborhood had been watching me for years. I took a shaky breath. "Did anything weird ever happen back then?" "Weird?" she repeated. "No, I don't think so. It was a safe neighborhood." Why, I almost told her, almost mentioned the letters, the handwriting, the fact that someone had found me after all this time. But I didn't want to panic her. "Just wondering," I muttered. She hummed again, distracted. "Well, if you remember his name, let me know. Maybe we can look him up." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, maybe." We hung up, but my skin still crawled. I didn't remember any boy from my childhood, no close friend, no neighbor I followed around. But someone remembered me, and they had never forgotten. The fourth letter came that evening. I almost didn't check my mail, but something in me told me I should. It was waiting inside my box, just like before. Same cream-colored envelope, same careful handwriting. But this time there was no message, just a Polaroid of me. The photo was taken from a high angle, as if it had been taken from a distance. But I knew what I was wearing because it had been taken right outside my building before I left for work. This time, I didn't hesitate and ran inside, locked my door, and grabbed my phone. My head whipped around, scanning the parking lot, the sidewalk, and the windows of the apartments across the street, and my heart slammed against my ribs, and they were watching me. I called 911 because I couldn't stand this any longer, and the dispatcher picked up on the second ring. "What emergency do you have?" My voice trembled as I swallowed hard and gripped the Polaroid so tightly that my fingers bent the edges. "I think someone is stalking me. Could you tell me what's going on?" "I've been receiving letters from someone who knows specifics about my childhood, and tonight they left a picture of me that was taken this morning outside my apartment. I believe that whoever it is has been observing me. Do you see anybody outside right now?" The dispatcher's tone became more concerned. My heart wouldn't stop, so I turned to my window and cautiously peered through the blinds. The street appeared the same as usual, with cars parked along the curb, street lights reflecting off the pavement, a couple walking their dog, and a man in a hoodie heading toward the bus stop. No one was staring at me or standing motionless, but that didn't mean they weren't there either. I said, barely raising my voice above a whisper, "All right, I'm sending an officer to your location. Keep your doors locked. Don't open them for anyone other than the police." I hung up and retreated, my heart, checking that everything was in its proper place. Then I grabbed the letters and the Polaroid spread out on my kitchen table. Seeing them all together made my stomach turn. I tried to make sense of it. If this was someone from my childhood, why now? What did they want? And then I realized something. The letters had started arriving exactly 1 week before my birthday. I shuddered. The knock on my door made me jump. I checked the peephole. A uniformed officer stood outside. I opened the door just enough to see his face. "Are you the one who called?" he asked. I nodded and let him in, locking the door behind him. Officer Grant, according to his badge, mid-40s, tired eyes, the kind of cop who had seen everything. I handed him the letters and the Polaroid, and he examined them quietly. "This handwriting, you're sure you don't recognize it?" I thought maybe it could be someone from my past, I admitted, "but I don't remember anyone who would do this." He nodded, flipping through the notes. When he reached the photo, his expression darkened. "This was taken today, this morning," he sighed, rubbing his temple wet. "Pull security footage from your building, see if we can get a face." He glanced at me. "Have you noticed anyone following you?" "No," I said, "but I feel like I'm being watched." He didn't dismiss me. That was the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "We'll have a patrol car swing by your building a few times a night. If you see anything out of place, you call us." "Okay," I said, but I wasn't sure I felt any safer. He left a few minutes later, taking the Polaroid and one of the letters for evidence. I double-checked my locks again before heading to my bedroom, but I didn't sleep. The next morning I left my apartment, cautiously scanning the parking lot, the sidewalks, every shadow, nothing. I tried to go about my day, but my nerves were shot. I flinched every time my phone buzzed, every time I thought I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Then around noon my phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello." Silence. I checked the screen. The call was still connected. "Who is this?" I demanded. And then a voice I didn't recognize spoke. "Happy birthday." My blood turned to ice. Click. The line went dead. I stood frozen. My breathing came in rapid gasps, and they recognized that it was my birthday. I phoned Officer Grant right once, and he replied that we had already looked at the building surveillance tape. An hour later, I sat in the police station, staring at the grainy footage that was playing on the monitor. The first few seconds showed what I expected: a man approaching my building, not just any man, someone I should have recognized, and I took a sharp breath that was interrupted by my own voice. In the video, the man arrived at the front entrance, took something out of his pocket, and used it to enter a key to my building. My hands frozen. "How does he have that, officer?" Grant didn't respond because of a more unsettling detail. As the man turned and adjusted his cap, I was able to see his face clearly, and it took a moment to recognize him. His features were older and sharper, but as soon as I saw his eyes, I knew that it was the boy from my childhood that I couldn't remember, the one my mother claimed I used to follow everywhere. He had found me, and he still remembered everything. That night I packed a bag. The police were looking into it, but I wasn't going to wait for answers. If he had my building key, he was closer than I had ever realized, and he was watching me. I booked a hotel under a false name and left town that night without turning around because I wasn't going to give him another chance to get closer. I almost disregarded the message when it arrived, since I had a hard day at work and was too tired to do much except lie down on my sofa and aimlessly browse through my phone when I got home. Social media was a complete mess, and my group chats were humming, when I got a text from an unknown number saying, "I know what you did." I scowled at the screen, my thumb hovering over the message, which was only 5 words long and lacked context. At first, I thought it might be spam or an incorrect number, but something about it made my stomach knot, so I read it again. "I am aware of what you did, but I hadn't done anything lately or in the past. My life wasn't fascinating enough for secrets. I probably simply played a practical joke when I locked my phone and threw it on the coffee table while shaking my head." But a few minutes later, I received another message that made me feel cold. You can't ignore this forever. I grabbed my phone. My hands were clammy as I wrote a response, but there was no response. I kept an eye on the screen, hoping the typing bubble would show up, but it didn't. Every time I closed my eyes that night, I kept thinking about the text, who sent it, and what they meant. I thought it was probably just a prank, but something about it felt too specific and purposeful to ignore, and by morning, there were no new messages. After a minute, I turned off my phone and let out a breath. Perhaps it was just someone playing a practical joke on me, and perhaps if I ignored it, they would stop, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone was watching me, and worse, they believed I had something to conceal. My phone remained quiet, so I attempted to ignore it. Perhaps the sender realized they had the incorrect number, or perhaps they were bored, but the unpleasant sensation persisted at work, and I continued checking it without receiving a response or an explanation. By midday, when my phone buzzed with a new text from the same unknown number lying won't help you, I was just beginning to calm down, thinking maybe I had overreacted. I almost dropped my phone, so I took a deep breath and typed back, "I don't know what you're talking about this time," and the response came right away, "Yes, you do my stomach." Having been twisted, I glanced around the office and became very aware of my sir. Was someone watching me? Was this someone I knew? I scanned the number again, but it was still unlisted with no name or information, and my heart was racing. I had two options: ignore it or explore further. I decided to delve further. I typed, "If you know what I did," hit send, and stared at my screen, heart hammering the three dots that appeared. A few seconds later, the reply arrived, and I felt ice in my veins. I had never met this person before, but they were acting as though I had been here before, as if I had done something wrong, and now they wanted to meet. I spent the rest of the afternoon deciding what to do. I could ignore it, but what if they didn't stop? What if they had more than just words? I could call the police, but what would I say? By the time I came home at 7:15, I was really agitated after receiving a vague allegation via text. I sat on my sofa and gazed at my phone. I didn't want to leave, but at precisely 7:30, I received another text saying, "I see you're not here, that's a mistake." I froze on my sofa, staring at the message. "I see you're not here, that's a mistake." My hands went cold, and I turned to face the window. It was now dark outside, and I had the terrible impression that someone was monitoring my apartment for the first time. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a prank. Whoever it was, they weren't guessing, and they knew I hadn't shown up, so they were watching. I forced myself to breathe, thinking I wasn't going to respond, and I moved toward the window as quietly as possible, peeking through the blinds. I looked around the parking lot, the sidewalk, and the street, but there were no obvious figures or cars that seemed out of place. I swallowed hard and checked the time, and at 7:35, a new text came in. "You shouldn't ignore me, because we both know what happened that night." I gritted my teeth, and my fingers trembled. "I'm not sure what you think I did, but you've got the wrong person this time. I saw you," and my breath caught, and a memory flickered at the back of my mind. That night had been the same. I had driven past the edge of town near an old industrial area, the roads deserted save for a few straggling streetlights. I hadn't seen anything, or at least I hadn't noticed anything, but what if a new text message had appeared, piercing my thoughts. You left before the police arrived, thinking no one would notice, but I almost dropped my phone. I had gone out a few nights ago just for a late drive because sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I would just get in the car and drive aimlessly while listening to music to clear my head. My hands were shaking as I frantically opened my laptop and pulled up local news, trying to find out what the hell had happened that night near the industrial area. When I saw that there had been a hit run, a man had been found dead near the old warehouse houses, and police were searching for witnesses and no suspects, but I felt my heart slam against my ribs. I knew that I hadn't hidden anyone, but I had been in the area, and now someone thought they had seen me and wanted me to pay for it, so I dialed 911. The dispatcher called 911 because I didn't want this situation to become any worse. "What emergency do you have?" I inhaled deeply. "Someone is threatening me, and I believe it has to do with the hit and run near the industrial district." There was a pause. "Are you saying you saw the incident?" My mouth went dry, but she asked for my information and I gave it my address and phone number. She said that police would be arriving. The police arrived within 10 minutes after I hung up, and I showed them the texts explaining everything, the drive, the location, and the news article. They listened intently, taking notes, and one of the officers, a tall man named Martinez, nodded toward my phone and asked if we could track the number, but I said no name, no details. "You called them a big mistake," but I didn't answer. Instead, I just stared at the words, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles ached. Martinez looked at his partner and said, "We'll have our tech team look it out in the meantime. Don't respond and don't go anywhere alone." I swallowed hard. "You think they'll try something we don't know," he said, "but this person is pushing you for a reason." The texts stopped coming that night. I didn't sleep, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I kept playing the drive over and over in my mind, trying to remember anything unusual. In the morning, the police called me. The number was a burner phone, and the officer Martinez said that it was untraceable, but we looked at security footage from the industrial district that night. My breath caught when he said, "Your car was seen on camera, but you didn't hit anyone." I was relieved, but he went on, "Why? But someone else did." "A few minutes after you left, a black sedan drove by." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Did you get a plate?" "Not a full one, but we're working on it." I let out, my whole body trembling, and the person who had been texting me wasn't a witness, and they were attempting to place the blame on me. After a week, the messages stopped coming, and finally the police. I was cleared of all suspects after tracking down the owner of the black sedan, a man with a history of reckless driving. However, I never forgot the chilling, creeping fear that someone was watching me and trying to force me to confess to something I hadn't done. Even now, late at night, when my phone buzzes unexpectedly, I still hesitate before looking because I can never be certain that someone else is still waiting. I've never been particularly close to my coworkers. I'm polite, I make small talk when necessary, but I keep to myself for the most part. Work is just work, a place I go do my job and leave. I don't linger in the break room, I don't join the after-hours happy hours, and I don't share much about my personal life. That's why it caught me off guard when David, the guy from accounting, started commenting on my lunches. It started small, a casual remark. "In the break room, sushi again," he said one afternoon as I Was grabbing a water bottle. I blinked at him. Yeah, how'd you know? He laughed. I saw the soy sauce packet on your desk earlier. Fair enough. I didn't think much of it, but then a few days later it happened again. Spaghetti today? He asked as we passed each other near the elevators. I frowned. Yeah, wait, were you near my desk? He shook his head. Nope, just guessed it was odd, but I let it go. Maybe it was just luck, but then it kept happening day after day. David would make comments about my lunch, whether I had eaten at my desk, gone to a cafe, or even taken my food to the park alone. He always knew, and I couldn't figure out how. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe David was just observant. Maybe he saw food containers in the trash or overheard me mentioning lunch to someone. Maybe it was all just coincidence. But after a few weeks I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started testing him. One afternoon I ate in my car windows up, parked a few blocks away. I didn't mention it to anyone, didn't leave any food packaging on my desk, didn't even stop by the office kit. The next morning as I was getting coffee, David walked past and smirked. Hoped the sandwich was good. I froze. It had been a turkey sandwich, the exact thing I had eaten alone in my car. How did you know that? I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. I left the office for lunch, walked 2 blocks away from my usual spots, and picked up a meal from a random food truck I had never visited before. I ate inside the park at a bench tucked away from the main path with no coworkers around. When I returned to the office, I avoided David because I didn't want to give him the opportunity to say anything. But just before the end of the day, as I was packing up, he walked past my desk and tapped the back of my chair. My stomach fell, and I carefully turned to see what the green curry's the best thing on their menu, he said, winking before heading toward the elevators. I sat there gripping my desk so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had never mentioned that place before, never gone there before. There was no way he could have just guessed. Something was very wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the past few weeks in my head, trying to make sense of it. Had he been following me, checking my receipts? No. He knew what I ate before I even threw anything away. I needed proof, so the next day I did something different. I didn't go out for lunch. Instead, I packed a meal from home, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, something I hadn't eaten in years. I kept it in my bag out of sight. When lunchtime rolled around, I went into the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and ate it there alone. No one saw me. No one could have seen me. When I got back to my desk, David was already there, leaning against the cubicle wall. He smiled. PB&J. I felt my stomach twist into knots. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. He laughed like this was some inside joke I wasn't in on. Classic choice. Then he walked away. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. This wasn't just weird anymore. This was dangerous. I needed to find out what was going on, because if David knew what I was eating, what else did he know? I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. I kept staring at my screen, pretending to work, but my mind was racing. How had he known? There was no logical explanation. I had eaten by myself in a closed toilet stall with no one else around. No garbage, no leftovers, and nothing to share. But David knew. I had to figure out how. That evening, when I came home, I began considering all the ways he may be able to acquire my phone number. I got to work early the following morning before most people arrived, so I carefully checked my workspace, under my desk, inside my drawers, and even behind my monitor. At first, I found nothing, but as I slid my hand under my chair, my fingers brushed against something small, and I froze slowly, peeling it off. A tiny black square tracking device. I had checked my apps, location settings, and emails, and nothing suspicious. Then I thought about my desk. David had been hanging around my cubicle a lot, but I told myself he was just being friendly. I turned it over in my hands, and my breath caught and my heart thumped in my ears. It was barely perceptible. The kind of thing you have to search for in order to find it. I spent the next hour arguing with David about what to do, because he always knew. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't following me. and he was listening. However, something about this wasn't just strange, it was planned. He had placed this in my office, in my personal space. If he was brave enough to do that, what else could he do? Instead, I went to HR and told them everything, including the comments and the tracking device, and how he always seemed to know things he shouldn't. I put the little bug on the desk and watched as their faces went whitened. Beth, the HR manager, asked, "Where did you find this?" I replied, "I think he's been tracking me." I didn't know what HR told David, but by the end of the week, his desk was cleared out, and no one mentioned him or gave him an explanation. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't, because when I got home that evening, there was a note waiting for me, neatly tucked under my apartment door. Beth looked at the device again, then back at me. "This is serious." I nodded, knowing that we'll handle it. I normally keep my pockets empty and don't keep napkins in them, since I'm not the kind of person who throws things away and forgets about them. As I reached into my jacket that night and felt the crumpled paper, I paused, pulled it out, and slowly unfolded it, my brow furrowing as I smoothed it against my palm. It was a napkin stained with ink. At first, I thought it was just a scribble, possibly a note someone had handed me earlier that I had forgotten about, but as I looked closer, a chill went down my spine, because it wasn't just any note, it was WR written in my own handwriting. "Could you please help me?" The writing was jagged, clumsy, and seemingly desperate, and the ink was smeared where my hand had been trembling while I wrote it. I just gazed at it. My pulse is racing, since I can't remember writing this or ever touching this napkin, but the handwriting was mine. I flipped the napkin over in the hopes of finding additional information, like a date or a name, but all I could find were those 3 words. "Could you possibly assist me?" My pulse was pounding, so I forced myself to swallow. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the napkin, my hands shaking a little as I traced the ink with my fingers, which was smudged and slightly faded, as if it had been held too tightly in a sweaty palm. I felt dizzy, as if I were trying to remember a dream that was just out of reach, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember writing it. That was the thing that frightened me the most. My days follow the same routine: work, home, supper, and bed. I don't forget things or lose track of time. I never go to bars, but I do occasionally get coffee on the way to work. It's possible that I was half asleep when I scribbled something and stuffed it into my pocket without remembering. I don't drink enough to forget things, and I don't take anything that would interfere with my memory, so how in the world did this napkin end up in my pocket? I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to think rationally. I opened my bank app and looked over my transactions. My most recent purchases were standard groceries, a gas station, and an internet order I ordered a few days ago. I didn't buy anything from a coffee shop or someplace that would make me feel drowsy. My gut nodded, so I looked at my call record. There were no odd numbers or missed calls, just the standard business contacts and a few texts from my sister. Then I looked at my messages. Nothing, no strange messages, no assistance requests, no hints. I inhaled deeply. Perhaps I was exaggerating. Perhaps I had written the note days earlier and just hadn't realized it until now, but deep down I knew that wasn't the case. The napkin felt fresh, the ink wasn't faded, the paper was still crisp despite being crumpled, and worse, I knew my own handwriting was hurried, frantic, the letters uneven, slightly slanted, desperate. It didn't look like something I had written out of fear. I needed to continue looking. I then scrolled through my camera roll, expecting to find nothing but my usual routine screenshots, random images, and a few memes saved from group chats. At first, everything appeared normal, but then I stopped when I noticed a blurry picture I couldn't remember taking. I zoomed in to try to identify anything, like a store or a sign that would have told me where I had been, but it wasn't my street. It was taken at night, and the dim yellow glow from the street lights in the distance barely illuminated the cracked pavement. Then, my stomach dropped when I noticed a hand that wasn't mine in the bottom corner of the picture, almost out of frame, and a sickening chill ran through me. I verified that it was taken at 1:47 a.m. yesterday night. I have no recollection of leaving my apartment yesterday night, taking this picture, or anything else. As I browsed through my phone in search of further photos or any information that might reveal where I had gone, my heart pounded in my ears. Just that one picture. I looked at my phone's recent locations, but the GPS history showed that I hadn't been anywhere for the previous 24 hours, as if my phone didn't want me to know that I had gotten up too quickly and that my chair was scratching the tile. I must be going crazy. Squeezing my phone in one hand and the napkin in the other, I paced my apartment and forced myself to think about going back last night. I had gone to bed around midnight, and I remembered that I had set my alarm and that everything was normal until suddenly there was a blank space in my memory, as if someone had taken a pair of scissors and cut out the missing time. I felt lightheaded. My breathing came in short, shallow bursts, and then my phone vibrated and sent a text from an unknown number you shouldn't have looked. I gripped my phone, rereading the message. You shouldn't have looked a second later. It was better when you didn't know I dropped the napkin. Someone was watching me. Someone knew I was trying to figure this out. And worst of all, someone knew what I did even though I didn't. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen, and a lump formed in my throat as a second message arrived. This wasn't just paranoia, though. I compelled myself to move, locking my front door and double-checking the deadbolt. I checked all of my windows, even the little one in my bathroom, which was locked. I wanted to keep my composure, but my thoughts were racing. What if they were outside, watching me right now? I paused before checking the peephole, but the hallway was empty, so I returned my focus to my phone. As I studied the computer and wrote out a response, my fingers shook. Who is this? The typing bubble emerged, vanished, and then reappeared with my heart racing. I clenched my hands as I tried to remember, and then a flicker of the smell of damp concrete street lights passing overhead footsteps, my own moving quickly, and then a voice not mine, someone else's low urgent. I sucked in a sharp breath, my eyes snapping open. I held my breath as a new message appeared. You asked for help. My stomach twisted, so I typed, but got no response. I then scrolled back up to the photo I had found on my phone, which showed a dark street with blurred street lights and that hand in the corner. Had I been trying to leave myself evidence? The night air hit me like a slap. The streets were too quiet, and I checked my phone for the photo's timestamp 147A. I had been there on that street and I hadn't been alone, so I had to return. I couldn't just sit in my apartment waiting for another message. I needed to see the place with my own eyes. Instead, I grabbed my keys, jacket, and shoved the napkin into my pocket. My fingers gripped the wheel tightly as I drove through the city. I knew the street from the picture, and as soon as I turned onto it, I saw that it was a narrow road lined with crumbling warehouses, the kind of place where people didn't go unless they had to. I parked and let my breath out in the cold air, and even though the street was empty, I had a gut feeling that I wasn't alone. I walked slowly, scanning the sidewalk, the curbs, and the alleyways between buildings, my heart thumping, when I noticed a crumpled napkin on the ground. The ink was smudged, but I was still able to read the words written in my own handwriting. A shiver ran up my back. I had previously visited this place and left a note for myself, but a rustling sound behind me made my blood run cold. My heart slammed into my ribs as I abruptly pivoted. A guy in black clothing stood at the alleyway's edge, his face partly hidden by the shadows as he observed me. I stepped back, gasping for air, and said, "Who are you?" He didn't respond, so he grabbed something out of his pocket. I prepared a phone and a weapon, but as he entered the low light, I saw that he was holding a crumpled napkin with my handwriting on it. My stomach turned, I felt lightheaded, and the world seemed to be tilting slightly as I muttered, "What is this?" His voice was firm and deep, and I suddenly recalled the running and the dread. The murmurs, and realizing that I wasn't the only one attempting to flee. I had pleaded for assistance, and someone had responded. The guy handed out the napkin and said, "I got your note." His eyes were as dark and worn as mine, and he added, "You were trying to warn yourself." I glanced at the napkin in his hand for a while, then down at the one I had previously discovered in my pocket, which had two messages. Two cautions, two individuals. Although I was still unsure of what had transpired that evening, I was certain that I had not been alone and that whatever we had been fleeing was still ongoing.